April 30th, 1943. The dawn light broke over the Andalusian coast, casting a pale shimmer across the waters of the Gulf of Cadiz. A fisherman near Huelva guided his small boat through the morning mist when he spotted something drifting in the tide. At first, it looked like wreckage from a ship, but as his boat drew closer, the outline of a man emerged, a corpse, bloated by the sea, clad in the dark uniform of a British officer. The fisherman pulled closer, the waves slapping against the hull, until the sight became unmistakable. The dead man wore the insignia of a Royal Marines major. His belt was fastened, his boots intact, and, most curiously of all, a black attaché case was chained to his wrist. The fisherman recoiled but knew the authorities had to be alerted. Soon the Guardia Civil arrived, hauling the body ashore and into Spanish custody. Spain, though officially neutral, was a country where the Gestapo had strong connections. Within hours, whispers spread through Huelva that a British officer's body had washed up carrying sensitive papers. By mid-morning, German agents stationed in Spain had caught wind of the discovery. The corpse was transferred to local officials for examination. To Spanish eyes, it appeared the unfortunate officer had drowned in the Atlantic after a plane crash. The uniform was convincing, the rank was clear, and the briefcase was irresistible. The man's identity papers revealed him to be Major William Martin of the Royal Marines. His pockets contained the mundane details of a soldier's life: theater tickets, a photograph of a fiancée, letters from family. But the true prize lay within the briefcase, still chained to his arm. German intelligence pressed Spanish intermediaries to secure the case. For the Abwehr, this was a windfall. The possibility of finding genuine Allied documents was too tempting to ignore. When the papers eventually passed into their hands, the Germans believed fortune had favored them. But nothing about this discovery had been left to chance. The corpse in the sea, the briefcase, the identity of Major William Martin, all had been carefully orchestrated thousands of miles away in London. What appeared to be a tragic accident was in fact the opening act of one of the most audacious deception operations of the Second World War. As German agents examined the contents of the briefcase, they found letters between senior Allied commanders hinting at plans for an invasion of Greece and Sardinia. To them, the details seemed genuine. To the Allies, they were carefully constructed lies. The Gestapo, always suspicious, nevertheless trusted Spanish cooperation. And the British, watching from afar, waited for signs that the bait had been swallowed. The dead man who washed ashore near Huelva was not a Royal Marine at all. His real name was Glyndwr Michael, a homeless Welshman whose body had been repurposed for war. In death, he had become Major William Martin, a phantom officer created by British intelligence to fool Hitler's war machine. On that spring morning in Spain, a fisherman had unwittingly stumbled upon the linchpin of a deception that would shape the course of the war in Europe. The question now hung in the air, invisible yet heavy. Would the Germans believe the story written in the pockets of a dead man? The stage was set. Operation Mincemeat had begun. The discovery of the body in Spain was only the visible outcome of months of debate and planning. To understand why a corpse was sent adrift in the Atlantic, one must return to the winter of 1943, when the Allies stood at a strategic crossroads. By May of that year, the North African campaign had ended in Allied victory. The remnants of Rommel's Afrika Korps and their Italian allies had been driven into surrender, and the Mediterranean was finally open to Allied shipping. The question that dominated London and Washington was simple, but fraught with consequences. Where would the Allies strike next? To Winston Churchill, the answer appeared obvious. Across the narrow waters of the Mediterranean lay Sicily. The island's capture would provide a gateway to the Italian mainland, remove Axis air power from the Central Sea, and open supply routes. Churchill described it as the soft underbelly of Europe. Yet to Allied planners, its very obviousness was a liability. The Germans expected an invasion there and had already begun reinforcing its defenses. Intelligence confirmed their vigilance. Reports from ultra-decrypts and reconnaissance flights showed Axis divisions pouring into Sicily, coastal defenses thickening with barbed wire, artillery, and bunkers. Hitler's instincts told him Sicily was the natural target, but he also feared Allied deception. He was suspicious by nature, and his generals were primed to see feints and diversions in every Allied move. It was here that deception became not merely desirable, but essential. If the Germans could be persuaded that Sicily was a diversion and that the true invasion would strike elsewhere, perhaps in Greece or Sardinia, then divisions would be pulled away from the island, thinning its defenses. The invasion of Sicily, codenamed Operation Husky, could succeed not only through firepower but through misdirection. The stakes could not have been higher. A failed landing in the Mediterranean would not only cost thousands of lives, but also delay the eventual liberation of Western Europe. Joseph Stalin, watching from Moscow, demanded a second front to relieve the Soviet Union. A setback in the Mediterranean would strain Allied unity, embolden Hitler, and prolong the war. The British had already experimented with deception. Operations such as Operation Barclay attempted to feed the Germans false signals about invasions of Greece and the Balkans. But to make the ruse convincing, something more tangible was needed. Evidence so compelling that even the most skeptical German intelligence officer would believe it. Enter the 20 Committee, the group in London responsible for controlling double agents and designing deception campaigns. It was within this circle that an idea took root: to plant false documents on a corpse and allow them to accidentally fall into German hands. It was an idea that combined audacity with simplicity, and it would become Operation Mincemeat. At its heart was a gamble. The plan assumed that the Germans would not only receive the documents, but also accept them as authentic. If they dismissed the ruse, the real invasion of Sicily would face reinforced defenses. But if the deception worked, the Germans would divert precious divisions to Greece, leaving Sicily vulnerable. This chapter of the war revealed the peculiar blend of strategy and imagination that defined Allied intelligence. It was not enough to marshal tanks and planes. The mind had become a weapon. In this struggle, truth and falsehood were as powerful as artillery shells. The Mediterranean balance now hinged on deception, and in London, planners prepared to transform a corpse into a weapon of war. From the dilemma of strategy was born a deception so audacious it bordered on fiction. The task fell to two British intelligence officers, Ewan Montagu of the Royal Navy and Charles Cholmondeley of MI5. Their challenge was extraordinary. They would not only need a corpse, but also a convincing life, a man whose death would mislead the German high command. The idea had precedent. Known within deception circles as the Trout Memo, the concept suggested dangling bait for the enemy, as a fisherman does for fish. A body carrying secret papers, conveniently lost to enemy hands, might appear to be an accident of war. But Montagu and Cholmondeley knew that for such a ruse to succeed, it had to be flawless. The Germans, after years of war, had grown skeptical and suspicious. Every detail of their creation had to withstand scrutiny. The search for a suitable body was grim. The man chosen was Glyndwr Michael, a Welsh vagrant who had died in London after ingesting rat poison. In death, he became the foundation of an elaborate masquerade. The corpse, anonymous in life, would be reborn as Major William Martin of the Royal Marines. But a name alone was not enough. To deceive, the illusion had to breathe. Montagu and Cholmondeley crafted a life for Major Martin down to the smallest detail. They gave him a fiancée, Pam, whose love letters, written on delicate paper, carried the warmth and intimacy of a real relationship. They slipped a photograph of a smiling woman into his wallet, along with a ticket stub from a recent theater performance. His pockets carried mundane reminders of a lived life: a used bus ticket, a bill from his tailor, an overdraft notice from his bank. Most important of all was the briefcase chained to his wrist. Inside, carefully prepared documents painted a false picture of Allied strategy. The letters suggested that the Allies planned to invade Greece and Sardinia, with Sicily mentioned only as a diversion. If these papers fell into German hands and were believed, the course of the Mediterranean War could be altered. The forgeries were meticulous. Each letter was crafted in the style and handwriting of senior Allied officers. One appeared to be from General Sir Archibald Nye, Vice Chief of the Imperial General Staff, to General Sir Harold Alexander, commander of Allied forces in North Africa. Another referred casually to Allied movements, cloaking the deception in the banal tone of genuine correspondence. Montague later recalled the pressure. It was not enough to deceive. We had to make the deception irresistible. The intelligence team tested every pocket litter, every crease of paper, ensuring they carried the faint odor of authenticity. Even the ink and stationery matched what would have been used by the British High Command. Yet the most challenging question remained. How would Major Martin end up in enemy waters? The solution was as daring as it was macabre. The body would be dressed in uniform, its lungs filled with fluid to simulate drowning, and then released off the coast of Spain, a country officially neutral, but with intelligence ties to Nazi Germany. The hope was that Spanish authorities, always under the watchful eye of German agents, would pass the documents into enemy hands. As the plan took shape, the officers found themselves strangely attached to the man they had invented. In their minds, Major Martin was no longer just a corpse. He was a fellow officer with a personality, a romance, and a duty to perform. Some even spoke of him with respect, as though he truly had volunteered for one last mission. By April 1943, Major William Martin was ready. A man who had never lived was about to embark on one of the most daring journeys of the war, to deceive Hitler himself. The corpse, now transformed into a weapon of war, waited in silence for the moment of release. The next chapter in this deception would unfold not in London's shadowy offices, but in the cold waters of the Atlantic, where the fate of nations would rest on a body that was never meant to be. In the early hours of April 30th, 1943, the submarine HMS Seraph surfaced quietly off the coast of Huelva, Spain. The sea was calm, and the Andalusian coastline lay in shadow under the fading night sky. On deck, the crew carried out a strange and solemn task, preparing to release a corpse into the tide. The man they knew as Major William Martin of the Royal Marines was already dressed in uniform, his black attaché case chained securely to his wrist. What looked like the tragic death of a British officer was, in truth, the centerpiece of one of the most daring deception operations of the Second World War. The sailors treated the body with the gravity of a burial at sea. Montague's carefully forged identity documents were in place, the pockets filled with personal effects, and the lungs infused with liquid to suggest drowning. As the officers read a short service, Major Martin slipped into the dark waters. The tide would carry him toward Huelva, a small port city known to be crawling with German spies. Spain was officially neutral, but its officials often leaned toward Berlin, and UBWEIR agents watched every move of the British and Americans with eager eyes. At dawn, a local fisherman spotted the body floating in the surf. Dragging it to shore, he immediately alerted the authorities. The dead man's uniform and chain briefcase made clear he was no ordinary casualty. Spanish officers brought the body to a local morgue, and soon British diplomats in Madrid were notified. This was the moment the deception truly began. The Germans, as London had anticipated, quickly caught wind of the discovery. Huelva was notorious within Allied intelligence as a nest of UBWEIR activity, with German agents working closely alongside sympathetic Spanish officials. Bribes flowed freely, and documents often passed into Nazi hands under the table. Within days, the Germans arranged for the briefcase to be inspected. The Spanish, careful to maintain a veneer of neutrality, cooperated enough to keep the Germans satisfied, while assuring the British that the contents were secure. What followed was a delicate dance of espionage. British diplomats lodged formal protests demanding the return of the briefcase, playing their role with convincing indignation. Meanwhile, German intelligence officers eagerly awaited the results of their secret inspection. Inside, they found exactly what Montague and Cholmondeley had prepared: letters between senior Allied commanders discussing a coming invasion of Greece and Sardinia. The papers dismissed Sicily as a diversion, reinforcing Hitler's own belief that the Allies would avoid what he considered the most obvious target. Back in London, the British waited nervously for confirmation that the ruse had succeeded. Signals intelligence units at Bletchley Park began monitoring German communications for any sign that the deception had been swallowed. When an encrypted Abwehr message was intercepted reporting that valuable documents had been obtained from a drowned British officer in Spain, hopes rose. Soon afterward, further decrypts revealed German analysts debating the implications. The tone of the reports left little doubt. The Germans believed they had stumbled upon an extraordinary intelligence coup. Montagu later recalled the tension of those days. Every cable, every snippet of intercepted communication was scrutinized with intensity. Would the Germans consider the documents too convenient? Would they suspect a trap? Or would they divert precious forces away from Sicily, leaving the real invasion route vulnerable? The stakes could hardly have been higher. Meanwhile, in Huelva, local witnesses remembered the curiosity surrounding the drowned officer. Some recalled Spanish officials whispering about the unusual briefcase chained to his wrist. For the Germans, there was little doubt. One agent reportedly described the find as a godsend, the kind of stroke of luck that rarely occurred in wartime. By mid-May, word filtered back to London. Hitler had been convinced. Orders were issued to shift divisions from France and the Eastern Front to reinforce Greece and Sardinia. German defenses in Sicily, while still formidable, would not receive the strength they otherwise might have. Operation Mincemeat had taken root, as Major William Martin was laid to rest with full military honors in Huelva Cemetery, complete with a headstone commemorating a man who had never truly lived. British intelligence officers in London allowed themselves cautious relief. The deception had passed into enemy hands. The corpse had done its duty. What remained was the ultimate test, the invasion itself. The next chapter in the story would determine whether the sacrifice of one nameless man, transformed into a legend, had truly altered the course of the war. The body had been buried, the briefcase returned, and the Germans thought they had stumbled upon fate's gift. What began as a fisherman's discovery off the coast of Spain soon reached the highest desks in Berlin. The Abwehr carefully forwarded the contents of the recovered documents, dispatches between supposed senior Allied commanders, and within days they were laid before Adolf Hitler himself. To Hitler, the intelligence seemed to confirm what he already suspected. For months, he had worried that the Allies might strike through the Balkans, threatening Germany's vital raw materials and communications with the Eastern Front. The letters from Major William Martin pointed directly to Greece and Sardinia as the targets of Allied operations, dismissing Sicily as little more than a diversion. It fit too neatly into Hitler's own fears. German officers later admitted their conviction. One staff officer wrote after the war that the papers were too perfect to be false. The deception had worked because it aligned seamlessly with the Führer's strategic anxieties. His confirmation bias was the Allies' greatest ally. By late May 1943, Hitler acted. Orders went out to reinforce Greece, shifting panzer divisions and Luftwaffe squadrons to the region. Sardinia, too, received additional attention. Its coastal defenses expanded and its garrison strengthened. At the same time, fewer reinforcements were dispatched to Sicily. The island remained defended, but not with the concentrated force the Allies had feared. The trap had sprung, and the Germans had walked straight into it. At Bletchley Park, the British listening posts worked tirelessly to decode intercepted German signals. Every decrypted message was studied with feverish anticipation. Then, in early June, came confirmation. German commanders were reporting to Berlin that they expected Allied landings in Greece. British intelligence officers exchanged glances of disbelief. Operation Mincemeat had not just been accepted, it had been swallowed whole. Ewan Montagu, one of the architects of the plan, later recalled the moment he realized the scale of their success. The deception had not merely distracted German intelligence, it had shaped Hitler's strategic decisions. We had led them by the nose, he reflected, and they had followed with perfect confidence. Meanwhile, across the Mediterranean, Allied planners prepared for Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily scheduled for July 9, 1943. The element of surprise, once thought impossible against such an obvious target, had been secured by the life and death of an invented man. In Berlin, The overconfidence was striking. Generals briefed their staff that any assault on Sicily would be a feint, designed to mask the real blow aimed at Greece. One recalled years later that the intelligence gave us absolute certainty. We no longer questioned the direction of the coming attack. That certainty was precisely what the Allies had hoped to engineer. Even when reports trickled in suggesting that Sicily might be the true target, they were dismissed or downplayed. The deception documents had tilted the balance of belief, creating an illusion so convincing that contradictory evidence was ignored. The Germans had blinded themselves. For the Allies, the tension was nearly unbearable. Success could only be confirmed when boots hit Sicilian beaches and German reinforcements were found absent. Until then, the risk remained that the deception would collapse at the last moment. Still, each new intercept, each decoded message strengthened the growing sense of triumph within British intelligence. Their gamble had worked. By the time Allied convoys began their approach to Sicily in July, Hitler had already diverted critical divisions to the wrong theater. Operation Mincemeat had achieved what few thought possible. It had reshaped the German High Command's perception of the war. The corpse of a man who had never lived had altered the movements of entire armies. The stage was now set for the great test, the invasion of Sicily itself. On the night of July 9, 1943, the Mediterranean was restless. A fierce storm swept across the sea as thousands of Allied ships pressed forward toward their target, the island of Sicily. Operation Husky, one of the largest amphibious assaults of the war, was underway. From the decks of warships, soldiers looked out into darkness broken only by flashes of lightning, the crash of waves, and the low thunder of naval guns preparing to open fire. Overhead, the storm scattered hundreds of Allied paratroopers. Many were blown far from their intended drop zones. Some landed in the sea, while others touched down miles behind enemy lines, cut off and alone. Yet these chaotic landings sowed confusion among Axis defenders, who reported Allied parachutists appearing in unexpected areas across the island. One German officer later wrote that the enemy seemed to fall from the sky everywhere at once. At dawn, the naval bombardment began. Battleships and cruisers unleashed their guns on Sicily's coastal defenses. The thunder of artillery rolled across the island, sending plumes of earth and fire into the air. Under this cover, Allied landing craft surged toward the beaches. American and British troops stormed ashore, wading through surf and smoke, while engineers cut through barbed wire and minefields. Resistance was determined in places, but it lacked the reinforcements the Germans might have deployed had their armies not been diverted to Greece and Sardinia. The deception of Operation Mincemeat had borne fruit. German commanders, convinced by the false intelligence planted on Major Martin, had dispersed their strength. Panzer divisions stationed in Greece stood idle while Sicily, the true objective, faced a weakened garrison. Italian troops, poorly equipped and demoralized, surrendered in large numbers. Still, the battle was far from easy. Fierce clashes erupted at key strongpoints like Gela and Syracuse. American paratroopers, despite their scattered drops, fought stubbornly to hold ground against counterattacks. Naval gunfire proved decisive. One U.S. destroyer fired so relentlessly to repel German tanks near Gela that its gun barrels glowed red-hot. A British officer later recalled that the sea itself seemed to roar with defiance. The campaign dragged on through July, fought under the blistering Sicilian sun. Dust and heat weighed on the advancing armies as they pushed inland, while the Germans executed skillful delaying actions. Villages became battlegrounds, and every ridge had to be fought for. But the momentum remained firmly with the Allies. By August 17, 1943, the last Axis troops evacuated across the Strait of Messina. More than 100,000 Germans and Italians escaped to mainland Italy, but the island itself was lost. German commanders would later admit that the misallocation of divisions to Greece, driven by their belief in the authenticity of Major Martin's papers, had fatally compromised Sicily's defense. The consequences rippled far beyond the island. The fall of Sicily opened the door to mainland Italy. Within weeks, Mussolini was overthrown, and Italy would soon surrender, shattering the Axis partnership in the Mediterranean. Yet amid the triumph stood a haunting truth. The fate of thousands had been shaped by a single corpse. The false identity of a homeless Welshman, Glyndwr Michael, repurposed as a Royal Marine officer, had changed the course of the war. His briefcase of lies had redirected Hitler's gaze and weakened the very beaches where Allied soldiers fought and bled. Sicily was a victory born not only of firepower and courage but also of deception, a victory that demonstrated how imagination and daring could rival divisions and tanks. The stage was now set for the next act, the invasion of Italy itself, and the slow, grinding advance toward the heart of the Third Reich. The corpse that drifted ashore in Huelva on April 30th, 1943, seemed like a minor curiosity to the fishermen who first found it. Yet in hindsight, that body changed the trajectory of the Second World War. Operation Mincemeat stood as one of the most daring deceptions in military history, a scheme born not from overwhelming firepower, but from audacity, patience, and imagination. For the Allies, the success of the plan was measured not in headlines, but in battlefields. German divisions stationed in Greece and Sardinia remained idle, while Sicily fell in the summer of 1943. This single misdirection helped unlock the Mediterranean, toppled Mussolini's regime, and opened the path into mainland Italy. The war, though far from over, had been nudged onto a course that would eventually carry Allied soldiers to the very heart of Nazi Germany. Yet the operation's legacy was more complex than strategic maps and battle reports. For decades, Major William Martin of the Royal Marines was honored as a fallen officer, buried in Huelva with full military rights. Flowers appeared at his grave, and Spanish locals remembered him as a mysterious foreigner who had played his part in the struggle against tyranny. The truth, however, remained hidden, that Martin was in fact Glyndwr Michael, a homeless Welshman who had died after ingesting rat poison in London. His identity was not revealed until the 1990s, when long-classified British files were finally made public. By then, the myth had already taken root, the idea that one anonymous body, carefully dressed in deception, had fooled the Führer himself. Glyndwr Michael had never volunteered, never enlisted, and never fired a shot. Yet his body, used without his consent, altered the decisions of armies and reshaped the fate of nations. His story became a stark reminder of the hidden costs of war, where even the nameless dead could be drawn into its machinery. Contemporaries of the operation acknowledged its impact. Winston Churchill once remarked that, in war, truth is so precious that she should always be attended by a bodyguard of lies. British intelligence officers who had conceived the plan, Ewan Montague and Charles Cholmondeley, later reflected that mincemeat was not simply a clever ruse, but proof that deception could save lives by shortening battles and sparing soldiers from bloodshed. Virginia Hall and other operatives working in occupied Europe understood the same principle, that war was not won by brute strength alone. Deception, resistance, and subterfuge were as vital as tanks and bombers. Operation Mincemeat became a textbook case, studied by generations of military planners long after the guns of 1945 fell silent. And yet, the story circles back to the image that opened it, the body in the sea. A corpse drifting toward the Spanish coast, clutching a briefcase that promised to change the war. It was a haunting tableau, equal parts tragedy and triumph, reminding us that history is often shaped by the unexpected, the unplanned, and the forgotten. Today, Glyndwr Michael's grave in Huelva bears a simple inscription that recognizes his true identity and his extraordinary role. It serves as both a memorial and a warning, that in the shadows of global conflict, individuals can be transformed into symbols, their lives rewritten by forces far greater than themselves. Operation Mincemeat was not only a success of Allied intelligence, it was a testament to human ingenuity in the darkest of times. And in that sense, the story of Major Martin remains one of the most enduring legacies of the Second World War, proof that even in death, one man, unknown, uncelebrated, and unremarkable in life, could change the course of history.